I'd like to welcome Jeremy Bassett, who's the founder and managing director of CUBED. Jeremy, what is CUBED?
So we're a boutique innovation agency focused on helping corporates collaborate with startups.
Good. So a lot of large companies over the last few decades have taken a particular approach to innovation, which involves setting up a corporate venturing unit. And these are units which are deliberately set up to one side. They involve investing in various ways in startup business, sometimes taken from outside, but more often taken from inside, with a view to creating the exciting new businesses that the company will be able to build on in years to come. And they set these things off on the side because they're worried that if they leave them in the core business that they'll get killed. However, these corporate venturing units have a very, very mixed track record. Most of them actually fail to deliver real value and they get closed down within the next 4 or 5 years of starting. In your experience, where do corporate venturing units go wrong and what should they be doing differently?
Yeah, so I mean the future is exciting, and as humans we want to build it, right? And I personally have learned this the hard way, that to build the future inside of a corporate is very difficult. It's expensive, it takes a long time, it's huge risk, and to be frank, it's unnecessary. Because the reality is that the future has already been invented. There are over 500,000 startups just on our database alone that are inventing solutions to problems that you didn't even realize were problems. And as corporates, I think what I've realized is that our job, or the job of corporates, is not to invent the future, it's to scale the future. And I know I personally learned this the hard way when I was at Unilever. We tried to build businesses through the new businesses unit, and it's a very tough gig. I mean, that unit was shut down after spending quite a bit of money over many years. And it's one of many venture units that have been shut down in the corporate.
So there are thousands of startups out there experimenting with all sorts of interesting stuff. Big companies don't need to recreate that startup activity. What they've got to do is to figure out better ways of working with startups.
Yeah.
Okay, so how can they do that? Because obviously big companies it's like chalk and cheese. They've got such different objective functions, they've got such different cultures. What in your experience are the best ways that big companies can figure out better ways of working with startups?
So I think, first of all, it's important to realize the opportunity. And there's a huge opportunity. I mean, startups bring the opportunity to shortcut your way to success. You can save yourself many years of painful experimentation through partnering. You can save yourself a lot of time, a lot of risk, a lot of money through partnering. So there's a huge opportunity to scale the future faster as a startup through collaboration, and there's a huge opportunity for startups.
So there's thousands of startup companies out there already doing lots of innovative things. The challenge then is for the big corporations to figure out how to work better with these startups rather than just recreating what the startups are doing. How can they do that?
Well, when we're talking to FTSE 100 companies, we talk about 3 things that have to change. We talk about the fact that they need to transform their culture. So they have to move from this environment of plan and perfect to being much more open to experimentation. But it's not just culture, you have to enable that. So you have to think about the processes. And most big companies are geared around stage gate innovation funnels and all that sort of stuff, which are not conducive to fast iterative experimentation. So you have to rethink and replumb the processes. But you also need connections. As big companies, we're very much comfortable working with other big companies. But if you really want to pioneer the future, you have to get comfortable working with the smaller guys.
Okay, so I know that when you worked at Unilever, for example, you were involved in creating a thing called the Foundry, which was specifically about almost like brokering or making connections between big parts of Unilever and the startup world. How did that work exactly?
Yeah, we saw our role as enabling experimentation across the company. So to enable experimentation across the company, you have to be able to engage not just a handful of leaders, but all of the leaders across the organization. You have to be able to transform the processes, not just for one function, but all of the functions. So I think, when we're talking to big companies and from the experience at Unilever, it really has to, the role of an innovation leader is to think about how do you enable this across the whole organization and take everyone on this journey with you?
Got it. And what does the brokering process look like? Because there's thousands of startups who would love to be able to work with Unilever. How would you find the right connections between the brand that's got a particular business issue that needs solving and the startup company that wants to work with them?
Yeah, it really requires two pivotal things. One is a solid brief.
Yeah.
So really understanding what is the challenge that the corporate is wanting to solve through startups. And we work a lot with our clients right now to think through, and help them frame those challenges. And we always say, the broader the brief, the better the brief. Like, go into this process ready to be inspired rather than looking for a very specific solution.
So one of your pieces of value added is helping the company to define the brief, the challenge, the opportunity, in a way that opens it up to a big set of potential partners.
Yeah.
And then presumably you've got a whole network of startup companies that you're working with, and you can help make that match, essentially.
That's exactly the second point. As big companies, you want to be working with the best in the world, not just the best in your inbox or the best in a VC fund that happens to have a portfolio, but the best in the world. And that's why we feel it's important that big companies have access to the world of innovation.
So if you're a large company and you are wanting to innovate, which pretty much every big company I know wants to do, your advice is, of course, you can continue to do R&D, but do that in an integrated way, but figure out ways of essentially opening up to work more effectively with this huge body of startup companies around you. Is that the kind of the startup?
That's precisely. And I think you can see this as, I think we will always need R&D in large corporates. It's not a replacement to that at all. It is a way to turbocharge R&D, so R&D can potentially be working with some of these companies. It's also a way to embrace the unknown and embrace more disruptive business models as well. And it works well across that.
And a final question, what about acquisitions? Because obviously a lot of big companies do end up making acquisitions. To some extent, acquiring a small company, it almost feels like that's like a second best solution. What's your view on that?
Yeah, acquisitions it's an interesting space. So I think traditionally corporates have grown through organic growth or acquired growth. And they still view acquired growth as a route to grow in this way. But one of the things we encourage corporates to think through is, how do you embrace leverage growth? How do you embrace growth through partnerships? The downside to acquisition is you have a lock-in. As soon as you've invested or acquired, you really want to make sure that that is the right company for your future. And chances are that that company might be superseded by someone else somewhere down the line. So a partnership-based growth strategy rather than an acquisition-based growth strategy is a way to make sure you keep the agility in your organization.
Got it. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.